everyone, welcome to HR Tech Talks. I am Ben Eubanks, your host, and today I'm going to have kind of a unique special episode. If you saw the preview kind of announcement for this, I'm actually going to do a deep dive into some of the research we just came up with in our brand new TA research study. And we're going to dive into what's happening in talent acquisition. We're talking to tons of leaders about what they're doing, how they're facing this frenzied market. So we're going to dive into some of the things that are happening on the TA side from your perspective as a leader. We're going to look at what's happening on the candidate side. We're going to understand how they are responding to what's happening, how their perceptions and requirements are changing, all that stuff. So as we're going through, as always, if you've got a question, throw it in there. I'd love to shoot you over kind of some of the findings, some of the research, some of the stuff that I don't cover because we do not have enough time to dig into everything. There is so much here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with that. I'm really glad to have the chance to do this with you, and it's going to be a ton of fun, even though it's not a normal episode where we normally have people joining us for the session. So this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to dive into this research preview. I'm going to share some really interesting stuff with you as we go through. So if you don't know me, or you're new here, or you don't know my story, I actually started out before I was a researcher by trade. I actually was a practitioner in the trenches. So the hardest job I ever recruited for was pilots to fly these things. This is actually called a CV-22. It's an Osprey aircraft. What's cool about these, if you look carefully at them, you're like, this looks different. Well, it can take off like a helicopter using the rotating blades. And then those tip forward. You can see them kind of tipping in a position now. They'll tip forward and it can fly as fast as the plane, essentially. So it gives the people flying these a lot of creativity compared to how usually you think of a helicopter coming and landing or a plane having to take off on a long runway. They get the benefits of both of those things. So really, really neat. When I started recruiting for this, though, there were only a handful of people, literally about 5 or 6 people in the world who were qualified to do this kind of flight instruction. And so I had to find the first person ever to actually train pilots to start flying these things. And it was wild, I'll just tell you. So I had to pull out all the stops, try all the creative tricks, everything else to try to get those people in conversations, try to figure out what made them tick, try to figure out what made them excited about a job. And it couldn't just be about, well, we'll pay you more than they will. It couldn't just be about, oh, look at this cool benefit. It had to be something else. I had to find the thing that mattered to that person and really emphasize that in that offer and make it front and center. So ultimately, spoiler alert, I was able to find the flight instructor. I was able to find the world's best maintainer of those aircraft and another leader as well to help lead and guide that group as they were traveling around the world, training pilots on how to fly these things. So just to give you a little bit of street cred there, hopefully for me, that I've been there, I've done that. I've got all the battle scars and everything else from recruiting. I love it. It's really difficult, but I love it. And so I thought that would be a fun way to start this off. Again, if you don't know me, or if you followed the show for a while, but you don't know the background here. So I spend my days as the chief research officer at Lighthouse. And that means I do 2 things. Number one, I cover the technology world. You're watching me here on HR Tech Talks because you may be curious about the HR technology world, HR, recruiting, learning technology. It's my job to cover that landscape. And I talk to 300 plus vendors a year to figure out what they're doing and how they're doing it and try to share those things back with you as practitioners and leaders so you can make better decisions about what to buy, what tools can help you, how to solve that problem. I can tell you that sometimes I'm talking to someone that has more of an established tool, like an HR system or an applicant tracking system. But other times I talk to companies here on the show and elsewhere in our research that are doing things that I didn't even know was possible, frankly. And if I don't know it and it's my job to stay on top of it, there's a good chance that you probably didn't realize that those were possible too. So it's so much fun for me to bring those things to the forefront and help you to understand how these tools can make you better at leading your HR function. I also do other kinds of research, though. As you'll see today in the conversation, we do a lot of data gathering on what's happening in the market so I can understand that better, keep my fingers on the pulse, but also really share that back with you. There's a lot of charts today, more than I normally share, frankly. I love stories. I love examples. I love making this very practical. So I'll share some charts and things with you today just to get through some of the data, give you some good ideas and plant some seeds for you as you think about how you can address what your candidates need, and also so you can see what your peers are doing in other hiring positions. Written a book, Artificial Intelligence for HR. Second edition just came out in January. Just an amazing experience. I'm working on book number 3 right now. All around talent. I can't tell you more yet, but it's coming. I'm the host of a podcast called We're Only Human, and then this live stream as well, HR Tech Talks. Most importantly, though, should be at the top of the bio probably. Dad of 4 kids, 11 and under, which is a joy and a challenge, and all those things rolled up together. Best and hardest job I'll ever have. And last but not least, ice cream is my love language. So if we ever have a chance to meet, we're going to events this year. I don't do the coffee thing. I just don't never enjoyed coffee. But if we have a sit down, we'll grab some ice cream. It'll be wonderful. So I want to share with you some of these things. But first, I want to tell you really quickly why in the world research? All the things that I can be doing. Why do I believe in this? One of the stats we just got from the study says that as a talent acquisition leader for you, when someone reaches out to you with research, it makes you more likely to listen. It makes you more likely to listen to the vendors and the technology companies, things like that. But I do it because when I was sitting there in your seat and I had to make decisions and I was trying to figure out what to do, I could pick up a phone and call a friend and things like that. But the value of this data that you're going to see in a minute is it's like picking up the phone and calling 1,000 friends at the same time and getting all that stuff right there in your fingertips so you can figure out what you're going to do next. So I really believe in the value of research. And I want to encourage you, if you're not using it to make decisions daily, if you're not using it to justify investment, you're not using it to figure out the next step to take, I encourage you to do even more of that because there's a lot of evidence showing that it's really a valuable way to do that. So in 2021, we did research on 3,000 plus companies and more than 5,000 workers across the globe. And so this year, we're trying to double that number, go even deeper there, and really understand what's happening. The more we gather, the more representative this is. And we're also gathering across a whole variety of areas. So this one is talent acquisition, big priority and challenge right now. We're also doing some gathering around learning and reskilling and employee experience and HR technology and how those fit together or don't at your company and all kinds of different things this year. So stay tuned. We're going to get into a whole ton of things, and I can't wait to be sharing some of that data with you. So as far as this research here, this study, it covered a couple things. Number one, 1,000 plus employers, all sizes. So if you are used to seeing research that's got 100 companies in it, this is not that. It's 1,000 companies, and it covers all these different sizes. So it's not skewed at one end or the other. It's not just for the really big companies. It's not just for the really small companies. In addition to that, we have 1,000 candidate responses, and those are global, by the way. Primarily US based, but we have a large chunk of that data that's from global non-US respondents because I want to understand if there are differences in there, and there really are. It was so much fun for me to be going through this and seeing it. We're looking at all these gender cuts of the data and age cuts and everything else. But one of the things that as an example of that, one of the questions we asked was, is it important for you as a candidate to have information about career opportunities presented during the hiring process? And more than 80% of them said yes, absolutely. But if we start actually looking at that by region of the world, in India, it's 90+%. If you don't do that, then you're going to look very strange in the hiring process because they expect it. But if you're in Australia, it's not as big of a deal. So it's kind of fun to see how that ebbs and flows around the world. All right. I'm going to skip this one because that's going like way down in the nerdy data weeds. But just know we do some data cuts in here on high performing companies with better revenue and retention and engagement and scores, things like that, because it helps me understand what those great companies are doing so I can help pinpoint for you which things make the most sense. So we're not going to go into all these areas today, but if you just look at this for a second, you can see this covers all kinds of stuff. Honestly, we're covering big priorities, budget changes, how you're planning on spending your budget this year, RPO. So if you're not using one of them, or if you are even, how they're fitting into this picture, assessments, process optimization, comp. I keep hearing that comp is a challenge. It's an opportunity. It's an issue. All these things in hiring. So comp is a big piece of this. And then we transition over to the candidate side. So what do the candidates want? What are they looking for? What information do they need? How are they making decisions? How they feel about video interviews and hiring assessments might surprise you there. Ghosting, the frequency, how often it's happening, what reasons there are for it, what things are out of our control, what things are in our control, and then a whole big bucket of other things that they care about. So it's pay equity and everything else you can imagine. There's a whole ton of stuff in this. So I want to go ahead and jump into a couple of things I want to share with you today. It's not a ton. So a couple of headlines on the employer side. We're seeing the data that recruiting is becoming not just a talent or HR level priority, but a business level priority. It's going up to C-suite, C-level, having conversations with board leaders, everything else, trying to figure out how do we solve this hiring problem. because it's affecting operational capacity for a lot of companies. So that's a big challenge. That probably doesn't surprise you to hear it, but 80+% of companies agree with that statement. So I wanted to have a stat, a number to put on that because I knew it was a problem. I knew it was common, but that still surprised me. I would have been happy with 60%. That would have been a good conversation starter. But 80+%, that is a conversation that every business needs to be having right now if they're not already. Number two, the short version of this for employers is out there is they're planning on doing more of everything if possible. More budgets for TA overall, more headcount when they can get it, more technology, most of all. How do we use tools to help us bridge the gap between what we can do and what our candidates need? Because there's a gap there, and technology is helping to fill that gap. And last but not least, I skipped over this slide a second ago, but we see in the data that strategic and proactive talent teams do something different. They have a different approach. And so we're trying to figure out what to call those. I'm thinking talent-centric teams. Talent-centric organizations is maybe how I'm going to refer to those. But these proactive TA teams, they're not passive. They're not laid back. They're not just taking jobs or posting online and hoping for the best. They're doing really strategic things to align with the business. And so there's some really interesting findings there as well. So if I have any chance to throw a comment out there on those as we go, I will. So the first question we ask every year is, what is your biggest priority? What are you and your team focusing on for the coming year? And this year, these are the top 6 that came back from that. And this list has got 12, 15 things on it, so it's pretty long. These are the top 6 that came back. What's interesting to me is other than diversity and inclusion, DEI, and hiring manager relations, everything else is a new entrant to the top 6. There's a lot of movement in the last 12 months. So we measured this last time. And so there's a ton of stuff there. What else I'm seeing, though, is that companies are trying to figure out what button can we push, what lever can we pull, how do we actually solve this problem? Because things are so hectic and frenzied when it comes to hiring that they're just trying to figure out anything they can. It still surprised me, though, to see diversity and inclusion at the very top of this list. That's exciting because companies, based on the data we're seeing, are going beyond the, yeah, that's important, but they're actually leaning in and looking for ways to practically solve for that. So they're using tools like some of the ones we've featured here on the show on HR Tech Talks in the past. They're using some of these tools to help them create better outcomes when it comes to hiring. They're using these tools to share diverse candidates and to borrow, right, or access that pool of diverse candidates from other employers that didn't get selected for jobs. All the silver medalists who were right up there, but they didn't quite make the selection, make the cut. Those people can be put into pools to be accessed by other companies. They're using tools to blind resumes so you don't see anything except for the skills, and you can make a more objective decision. We can go all these different ways, but these are the top priorities employers are seeing right now and how they're trying to tackle what's going on in the world. I also asked a different type of question about that, but trying to get to the same thing. How are you solving the tight talent market? How are you solving the challenges presented by this market today? The number one way, employers, again, technology, tools, systems, platforms. We're trying to use these things to help us. And there's a wide variety of those tools out there. I actually worked with a company a few weeks ago that was looking at a new tool to help them on the hiring side. We went through kind of a landscape to look at, here are some of the things that I see that are interesting. Here are 3 or 4 different categories you might consider if you're trying to solve different problems. So there's so much happening there. There's new tools being developed and put into the marketplace every single day because there's a need here, obviously. What's interesting, though, is you look across these answers, comp, adjusting our processes to be candidate friendly, all the way over to the very far left, which is hiring more recruiters. That's the fewest thing. And why don't we just do that first? That seems like it's the easy thing to do, right? Well, you may pay $80,000 for a new recruiter, or you might pay $40,000 for one of these tools that does some of those sourcing things you need, or some of the recruit marketing things you need, or some of the video things you need in the hiring process. Right now, the number of job postings for recruiters is 5x what it was pre-pandemic. So there's so much demand there. And companies can't find recruiters for anything reasonable in terms of comp for many of them. So if you're hiring for a recruiter right now and you're having a hard time, that's why. That's a big challenge. So I've talked to leaders that are saying, okay, we're putting these things in place to develop new recruiters, to bring them out of our workforce ranks and develop them into a recruiter using their own experience and industry expertise and everything else, because that will help us to bridge that gap a little bit. So there's so many different ways you can try to solve for this. To go deeper on the tech side, though, we actually asked what tools companies are shopping for, and it's across the board. And you can look here. I don't know where your company falls, what things matter most to you, or what things you're prioritizing. But we're seeing really interesting things happening around assessments. Companies are using these tools to help figure out because they realize, you know what, in good times, there's plenty of candidates. I have to pick, from all these candidates and make the right choice. In times where candidates are scarce, like today, you don't get a second chance. You've got to make the right choice the first time. They're using they're using assessments as a way to help solve for that. We're also seeing some wild stuff happening in terms of combinations of these. So we're looking at interesting duos and trios as companies, especially larger ones, are saying, okay, we can't solve this with one thing. We need two things, and here's where we're going to pair those up. Maybe it's sourcing and analytics, or maybe it's recruitment marketing and diversity hiring, whatever those things are. So they're looking at, we're doing some analysis right now to understand that. One of the other things that I keep hearing over and over again, and this may be something that you've thought about, is evaluating your hiring process, looking at the way that you're approaching hiring, how you're solving the problem, what's working, what's not. Have you looked at that recently? Because for these companies here in the dark blue box, they've done it more than 6 months ago. Guess what? Things are moving so fast that whatever you looked at 8 months ago probably is not applicable anymore. Things are changing so quickly. And I would encourage you that you need to do this. You need to revisit this. If you've done it, revisit it again. If you have not done it, take some time. Look at your hiring process. Look at the steps you're taking. Go through it yourself, or put some of your team members through it. See what it's like. Does it take you 30 minutes to complete the application, and you can only do it on a computer, not on a mobile device, and it requires you to do all these extra steps? If that's the case, you are going to be losing out on candidates. You probably already are, but that will help you to pinpoint where you're losing out on them. Okay, so there's the employer side. I told you I wouldn't take too long. I want to jump through some candidate things really quick, show you what's happening there, and then we'll wrap this one up for the day. A couple things we're hearing on the candidate side. Number one, they don't want to just take a job. They're looking at a longer term decision, which may be contrary to what some of the things are that you're hearing, but there's a couple data points I'll share with you that really indicate that that is the way they're going. That's the way they're leaning. And if a company treats them as if this is a long-term thing, they're going to respond that way. If a company treats them like we just need to put a rear end in a seat right now, then candidate is going to treat it like a short term, I'm getting paid well, but I'm going to find something else. Number two, they want to know pay information as early as possible. The earlier you show it to them, the better. And what's really intriguing is when I show you that stat in a minute, I'll tell you how the age piece fits into that, because it may not be what you expect. And last but not least, there's a significant percentage of candidates that have ghosted after accepting an offer, not just disappearing during the process, but after they accepted an offer. But there are some things that we can do to help solve for that. So a couple things like communicating more frequently, more often, more carefully, not taking things for granted, not assuming that when someone accepts an offer that they are on the hook, because the data show that they're juggling multiple offers. So if you offer and they accept today, and they get another one tomorrow for 10% more, they may not show up at all. So we've got to be really careful, ask about other offers, ask about things they're juggling, keep those lines of communication open, because if you don't do that, you're going to think that you've got them and they're not going to be there. So there's a lot of stuff there. There's also some interesting age data on that one too, by the way. So someone who is 25 is much more likely to have ghosted an employer than someone who is 55, based on the actual data that candidates are telling us. So there's really wild stuff that we're seeing here in terms of changing expectations and what's socially acceptable. A couple of things really quickly for you. How important is it that hiring managers talk about career growth? Well, this answer here pretty much says it all. 80+% of candidates want to hear about this. I told you a minute ago, they're making these longer term decisions. They want to know all the things. They don't want this to be dangled out there and say, hey, we'll talk about that once you start with us, because too many companies, too many managers have said that and then not followed through. So they want to use that as a way to sift through and sort which offers, which companies they're going to consider if you tell them about those career opportunities during the hiring process. Other things, other big factors there. Number one, they want to know the pay rate. They want to know what they're applying for as they're applying. They don't want this to be a conversation that happens a week later and find out they're excited about it and the role's definitely not a fit because it's 10K below what they're making, or there's some kind of mismatch there. They want to know those things. They want a speedy application. They want transparency, all those kinds of things. What's interesting though is we cut this data by frontline workers. This changes up. There's other things that they want to see in there, like being able to complete an application on a mobile device jumps in the top three if you're hiring frontline workers. So keep that in mind. I'm talking about this stuff from the candidate side to help you understand what your candidates are thinking, what they're feeling, what their priorities are. Okay. This actually came from a study we finished at the very end of last year, but I'm sharing it here because it's super relevant to this and it shows you how expectations and social acceptance of things is changing. So, if you accept an offer, how long would you consider other offers, other jobs? You see here that 1 out of 3 on the left say that I'm committed. The other 2 out of 3, after accepting an offer, say anywhere from a few weeks until never. It depends. I'm never going to be fully committed. So this is an example of how that's the ghosting stuff and how some of the perceptions are changing. Commitment is no longer commitment for candidates. And say what you will, I feel old fashioned to say that a commitment, you give your word, you should commit to that. But the data show that that's not the case anymore. And we're looking at this right now. There's some interesting differences in men and women. We're looking at this by age, trying to figure out some things that factor into this. Is it remote versus not? What we actually found in the data when I started looking at that is people who are working remotely, they actually are more likely than someone who's showing up in person to be committed after they accept the job. So it's not that they're remote, so they're less tethered. No, they actually appreciate that more. They appreciate the flexibility. So they are actually saying, I'm more committed to this job than someone who shows up in person. So there's some interesting differences there we're continuing to explore. Last but not least here, candidates expect transparency and they expect speed, immediacy. We want to see this stuff now. I can push a button and watch a movie in 5 seconds. I can call a vehicle to come pick me up. I can order food. I can do all these things. I want to be able to know what the status is on my application immediately, if possible. If I had not given that option, this would have shifted a little bit and still would have been more heavily focused on a weekly update. When I gave candidates an option, do you want to be updated instantly through a website, mobile app, like a portal on the website, something like that? That was number one answer. So 7 out of 10 candidates want to know right now, if possible, or this week, if possible, what the status of their application is. I talked to a leader recently who's doing a lot of hourly hiring, and he said essentially that he doesn't have a window of days. He has a window of hours to respond back to people because they're going to be snapped up by someone else quickly in today's market. So there's so much stuff going on. I wish I could spend another 30 minutes here just sharing stuff with you. Probably would bore you to tears, but it gets me excited, as you can tell, because there's so much opportunity for us as employers to understand what the candidates need from us and to serve them well. So I'm developing some talks out of this right now, some key things on things you thought you knew, but may not be actually true, some different things like that. So stay tuned. I'll be posting about those coming up, other opportunities to hear me speak on these things, share about these. If you want to see this, other cuts to the data for your company size or for your industry, things like that, happy to do that. I met with a large restaurant HR team recently and shared with them some of the key findings as it pertained to their industry on hiring and on retention for their industry specifically. And they use some of those things to make some different decisions about how they're continuing on in their work. So there's all these different ways we can use this. And I'm pumped and I'm excited. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be able to share some of these things back with you and serve you that way. So if you want to stay up to date on the research, by the way, the report is coming in a couple of weeks. It's already done. It's in the designer's hands. It's a big report, but all this data and some more that you haven't even seen yet, if you want to get a copy of that, you can go over there and sign up on the website. It's free. We'll send you that report when it's done. If you have other questions, you want to ping me, feel free to do that here on LinkedIn or there. I appreciate it. Thank you so much again for your time, for the opportunity to share with you and give you some ideas on what's happening in the broader world out there. It's unlike anything that I had to do that I saw when I was recruiting those pilots, like I mentioned earlier. But there is an opportunity for us to do this better, to improve our results, to improve our outcomes, to treat candidates well, to help the company meet its needs, all those kind of things. It's going to require some attention. It's going to require some effort. It's going to require some strategy to be able to make all those things happen. But I believe that you can do it. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll catch you again next time on HR Tech Talks. Have a wonderful rest of your week.